There's a small group of attorneys that's working on this issue, led by Julian Gresser. I also want to point out that when Cindy Franklin came to Washington to talk to the GAO, she came with Ellie Marks. Ellen Marks has been fearless fighting on this issue on behalf of her husband, Alan Marks, who is now struggling with brain cancer. And we all owe them a great debt of gratitude for their leadership on this issue. She played an amazingly important role with the Berkeley, California right to know about cell phone radiation. And ultimately, this decision is about the right to know and about the requirement of a federal agency to use the latest information and show that it has given it a full and complete hearing. There are questions from people who are unable to go into public buildings. And I wonder whether, again, we see the opportunity for action to be taken on this. Dr. Ben Ishai, could you talk briefly about the requirements in Israel in terms of placement of antennas on schools and close to children, and what you see as the best hope for reducing exposures to our children?
Well, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I don't have very good news from Israel because in our latest budget law, which is now before the Knesset building, the same communication industry is now trying to push through legislation to allow them to establish antennas with no building permission in municipalities. Up until today, basically, the entire placement of antennas have been controlled by building regulations. And so the municipality was able to keep cell phone antennas at least 100 meters away from school buildings. And many municipalities had, in fact, stopped having Wi-Fi being allowed in schools, or even demanding that children would have cell phones turned off when in school. This is set to change if we are unable to challenge this new ruling from our communications ministry. Once again, the very same thing that has happened in the States with the FCC is happening over here too, where the powerful industry lobby is trying to push forward easy use, if you like, legislation to let them simply place small cell whatever they would particularly care to. But as I said, up until now, at least 100 meters from schools, and not on school buildings. Any antenna placed on a building could not be placed on a residential building, only on a commercial building, and then must be at least 4 meters above the roof of the building itself. And if I get technical and talk about how the transmission would have to be, there are limits placed on what would be the angles of transmission that could come, so the people directly under would not be adversely affected. I sincerely hope that we'll also manage in our public battle over here to prevent the cell phone industry from being able to place small cells willy-nilly wherever they particularly care to.
Well, I want to point out that the current law in Israel does say you cannot have antennas on these schools. And what you're telling us that there's a very active effort now. And we hope, quite frankly, that Israel will pay attention to this recent decision from the court, which has, remember what we are talking about here. The US Court of Appeals, right below the Supreme Court, has looked carefully at all the evidence submitted, including your excellent submission, Professor Ben Ishai, along with thousands of others. And it has said to the FCC, you have got to take this evidence into account. Hopefully, this will be a wake-up call, not just in the United States, but in Israel and elsewhere. The FCC cannot get away with just more words on this. They actually have to establish a reasoned record of rational decision-making. That could mean bringing in contractors to evaluate the evidence. That could mean opening up a new record. The question is, will this have an impact on the billion-dollar 5G juggernaut? We hope so. We hope so, and it remains to be seen. But literally, again, Dr. Ben Ishai, please comment on the relationship between 5G and what we found with the studies of 2G and 3G, and why those studies on 2G and 3G are in fact relevant to 5G.
Yeah, definitely. When you look at the actual mechanics of how transmission happens, how do we actually transmit data from the base station to the cell phone. There are a number of ways in which it can be done using time division, using orthogonal frequency modulation, i.e. cutting up the frequency band into small segments and transmitting in small segments to be able to carry much information. The 2G, the 3G, and even up to the 5G are still using the same basic formats all throughout the way. The main change has been, of course, in the number of frequency bands that they've been used, and particularly in 5G, the reason to move to a higher frequency band is that you can simply pack in much more information. But the signal itself is still actually quite similar. So in terms of a biological consequence, for biology, it still looks very much the same. So in bioelectromagnetics terms, there's no great difference in terms of a signal which is a 2G modulated signal or 3G modulated signal or 5G modulated signal. Therefore, as a bioelectromagnetician, if I see an effect using a 2G modulated signal, I will expect the same sort of effects to be happening on the 5G modulated signal. Now, once again, the statement by industry that the 5G is relatively harmless because of the wavelength, the higher wavelength, will only penetrate into the skin and no deeper, is also throwing mud in our eyes because biologically speaking, the skin is the biggest organ in the entire body. It makes no particular sense to consider that if I deposit electromagnetic energy into the skin, that's going to be good or better than if it goes deeper into the body. You will still cause the same overall problems than you would if you were penetrating deeper into the body. Another important point, as I said, the skin is the biggest organ in our body. A lot of the symptoms that we see with electromagnetic hypersensitivity are very similar to sort of an allergy in some ways. And as you know, the skin can be very susceptible to allergic reactions. So there is no justification at all in industry terms to state that, okay, higher frequencies are going to be better for us because they'll only penetrate slightly into the skin. No justification at all. We will still get heightened signals. That's on one point. There is another point I would like to point out beyond the fact that all these signals look very similar to us. When we start to investigate 5G signals, the future 5G signals, and we look at the densification of antenna that will be used, it is very clear for us that the energy requirements in terms of electricity, in terms of the burning of fossil fuels, are going to rise dramatically. The last estimation that we had is that a 5G network will increase the national energy bill by 10%. This means that the 5G, far from being part of the green revolution, helping us go further into an environmentally more safe world, will actually do exactly the opposite. It is probably one of the most energy intensive ways in which we could be transmitting information, Wi-Fi, whatever you want to put. It is actually very un-environmentally friendly. Thank you.
Thank you.